Hello there, good people. Man, so glad to be here. Of course, it is well, I won't say a special edition, kind of a holiday edition. It's President's Day here in the US. And historically, I have done a special presentation on leadership. And we're going to get a little bit of that here today. Not going to be fresh, kind of be reviving, there we go, reviving some conversations that I have hosted previously, and we'll get into that in just a second. But before we get there, hello, my name is Patricia. I am an attorney, former lobbyist, and executive in nonprofit and government agencies, and mother, wife, writer, all the things. But my focus here is all on viewing all of those things through my life experiences to share some insights on leadership, on um, being an advocate and empowering other people, on wellness and self care and how important that is in what we're doing today, especially in today's world. And of course, on one of my favorite topics of all time, relationship building, and how you can do that intentionally with purpose while being authentic. And so, this is just an opportunity for me to share on all of those fronts in some way throughout the conversations. And I hope that you will join me. Please like and subscribe because this is the effort to get this content out since we've revived this channel, and I look forward to being able to continue to provide some good sound content that people actually find not just helpful but inspiring and motivational, and that motivates them to take action. Yeah, whatever part of your life that it needs to happen. So here we are. So today we want to talk a little bit about, maybe we can bring some decency, courtesy, and kindness back to leadership, especially in presidential leadership. But and I use those words specifically because uh, former President Barack Obama used that term or that phrase in describing how he still believes that most of the American public does believe in decency and courtesy and kindness in our country, in our political relationships, that it's still important and that the quorum is still important, even though all of the actions that are going on right now do not indicate that and do not support that. Not that it doesn't support the American people believing it, but the administration is not acting in such a way. So it was very inspiring to, and uplifting, I should say is the word, to hear President Obama give acknowledgement to the failures in decency that are going on right now, and yet still have some hope about it. That's a whole other conversation. Is maintaining hope in the midst of chaos. That sounds like a conversation to be had. Um, so how we get to this conversation is almost 10 years ago. I can't believe it's been almost 10 years ago. I was, it was presidential. Uh, President's Day was coming up. It also falls during, Black History Month. So I probably was doing some type of Black History Month preparations and content and things like that. But I really felt led to kind of do this thing about leadership legacies. So I poured a lot of time into doing some research on kind of like what great leaders, former presidents who were having to show some unique leadership skills and abilities during challenging times, what would otherwise be challenging times. Now, are there ones that always, sure. And is there someone else that someone could say it might apply to? Sure, you can. But these are the ones that I chose because they stood out for me. And so I focused on three presidents at first, and that was George Washington as the first president of the country, um, Abraham Lincoln because of his oversight during slavery, and then thirdly, Franklin D. Roosevelt because of his oversight over the country during a depression. There was war times. There was a lot going on there, and so those are the first three. And then after the initial cycle, I came back about a year and a half later, maybe a year, and I updated it to include President Obama because by that time he had been elected president, and as the first Black African American uh, president in the United States, I figured it was probably appropriate to include him, as well as some of the great challenges that he had to face during the course of his presidency. Between there being the Great was it pretty sure that's about the right timing. Great Recession, recovering in that. There were some horrible shootings during that time, the whole healthcare, managing healthcare legislation. There was a lot going on. So that's how I came to those four uh, ultimately. And there was so much in that presentation. I talked about what leadership mindset needed to be addressed, what their mindsets needed to be for as appropriate for their times, what what were their individual, unique, bold leader moments, and also how they built strategic relationships. Now, this one I will probably come back to all on its own as well, because there was some really powerful content there about what each one of them had to do in order to build relationships to help them get through their uh, their particular presidencies and the challenges that they were facing. Really, really just phenomenal when you really think about it and give thought to it and the commonalities between them, even though they spanned hundreds of years, right, between them. And so there's also a great, before I forget, there's a great book that's on my to be read list because I think I've read pieces of it, but not all of it. But it's one of my anchor books for this year, and it's by Doris Kearns. Oh, just went blank. I will put it in the description, but it's leadership during turbulent times. That's the name of the book, and it's talking about various presidential leadership term stuff. And she's a famous um, author when it comes to historical history regarding politics and all of that. So I will drop that full name in the description as well as the updated. So I did another updated. So what happened was I did my initial video content, which ended up being 3 hours, and they were done an hour each at first, and then added the fourth one. And unfortunately, in all of the things, social media and platforms, I'm hoping it's on an old computer. I'm almost positive it is, but I cannot access that video right now. It's old video, but the content is still great. And I have the content because I still keep paper copies for everything. Hello. But also, but also I ended up using that content to build conference workshops. So I think the first time was in the fall of that year. So after I did it via video for President's Day during that whole whatever week it was, that I then went on and developed it into a conference workshop on leadership legacies, is what it was called, that I presented at a women's leadership conference, I believe it was. And then once um, I added President Obama, I had another conference that I was asked to speak at, and I utilized it, and that version of it had him in it. So I've done this presentation several times, and I still have those presentation notes. So that's how I, preserve that content, utilizing it many different ways. But after that, I'd always been wanting to do one for Women's History Month. I was going to do a women's history version of it. And, we still have not had a female president of the US. Hello. And the moment we do, I will be updating that content for that as well. However, I was just going to focus on some famous women throughout history and leverage it. And I never quite got that full series off the ground. A project that is still waiting to happen. But what I did do a couple of years ago was I wanted to do it. I knew I didn't have the capacity at the time to do fully four different people. So what I decided to do was to take one um, women leader and really dive in, telling her story and then applying it across the board there. And that's what I did. And so that series is available, and I do have access to it. And I will drop the link to the YouTube playlist that has it's uh, three three or four videos, I believe, talking about it. And the subject matter was Harriet Tubman. I was really inspired by that. I've always been an admirer of Harriet Tubman and the work she did, but once I saw the version of the movie Harriet, where Cynthia Erivo played her, I the movie was just fantastic. I'm trying to see if I can find some kind of link to it. Absolutely fantastic, well done, and really brought to life all of those things. So that motivated me to revisit and do this that limited series for women on that topic, but I spread it out over for utilizing Harriet Tubman as the subject. So that brings me to what those bold leadership nuggets are. So that was was it fourth or fifth thing. So in the original presentation, I talked about mindset. I talked about bold leader moments that were unique to each of those presidents that I mentioned, how they built strategic relationships to help them during those difficult times. And then the fourth thing that we're really going to dive in here, which is those bold leadership nuggets, those not just perceptions, but insights that truly are universal and not limited to you having to be president of a major world power in order to exhibit them. Which is why I focused on it, because it doesn't have to be. If you're going to be a leader in your world and in your space in any way, these principles apply to you as well. And that's why I wanted to share and focus in on today. So the first bold leadership nugget that I brought the to the forefront was that you have to be a leader in your own life, no matter what things look like around you. Seems like a simple and obvious statement, but it's not. Because so often, the most difficult person to lead in our lives is literally the person in the mirror. And that can be just as challenging, if not more so, than leading a group of people, leading a project. But what does it look like and what does it mean to lead yourself? And it requires a lot of reflection, a lot of internal reflection about who you are, who you want to be, how you want to, not just to be perceived in a moment, in a situation, but how you want your legacy to be reflected as a result of it as well. And sometimes that comes about deliberately, or should I say, sometimes that comes about accidentally when you're like, you know what, this is why I want to make sure my legacy's good. And there are times, because there are a couple of those presidents where they're like, no, absolutely. I know what I want my legacy to be on this, and I'm going to be very deliberate about how I show up. The one of the stories that comes to the forefront for me with George Washington is the fact that while he served 2 terms and called it quits deliberately, he could have served a third one. They wanted him to serve a third one because he was very popular. He had been a military person, a leader, all of those things. But he believed in how the precepts that the country had been founded on about democracy and about how it should move forward. And he did not want it to move forward with the first president taking advantage of his military uh, popularity, for lack of a better word, popularity as a military leader and his service that he'd already done, in violation of that, right? That's not what he wanted. And so that required leading in his own life from the perspective of that means you have to set your ego aside. That's huge because we already know that in modern times, especially current times, there are leaders who would not put their ego aside and they would have taken advantage of the situation and pursued it. So that's the first thing, is like look taking time out to really engage in some reflection about what it looks like for you to be a leader of yourself, regardless of what's going on around you, regardless of the pressures that are coming your way or the temptations, right, to approach things a certain way that are coming. Um, but being able to stand up, not even about confidence, is much more, if anything, in some ways, it's about, mm, there's some aspects of humility and what's another, I think the ego piece coming in, but like dampening that to recognize that in that moment or whatever the situation, that it's bigger, right? The moment, the opportunity. So there's something bigger out there beyond how you can show up in it for that little bit of time, right? It's kind of balancing that, balancing how you show up in that moment with the moment itself. Ah, yeah, that. So that's the first one. The second bold leadership nugget that came to the top is you have to be willing to assess the situation and step away, because it is so easy to have something come up and then to decide to dig your heels in, to take a stand and not back off of it. And is there a time and place for it? Sure, absolutely. But there's also a time and place for recognizing, for having situational awareness and realizing, I don't need to take that step. I don't need to move that way. Let me pull back. And that's again a difficult piece. Like there has to be some self awareness about who you are in that space, in that leadership moment, in that leadership experience, to also recognize that, you know what, we're gonna let that one slide. And this is something that can be difficult. I know that I've had several of those moments personally in professional situations where you're like, no, I need for them to know I'm right about this. Did they need to know that every single time? Maybe, maybe not. But there are probably times where it would have been like, you know what, let it slide. And I had to grow into that though. That was not an automatic thing. Because what happens is when you feel like you've got to push forward anyways, sometimes it's not about the situation, it's about uh, operating from a space of scarcity or insecurity, you know, of not feeling confident that you can step away and still maintain the respect or the trust or whatever. There's so many aspects that can arise to that. But again, like I said, when you do the work, you can um, assess the situation objectively and recognize when you should just walk away from it, let it go for the moment, put a pin in it, like they used to say, and keep moving and keeping an eye on the big picture, which each one of these presidents had to do all the time, right? The third bold leadership nugget that I took away from their experiences was that sometimes you just got to take action despite apparent deficiencies and obstacles. And this is not for the weak at heart, right? These are the moments when a decision has to be made, an action has to be taken. It looks really bleak, it looks really bad. You don't have all the people or the things or whatever that you'd like to, but you've got to make a decision and you've got to take action anyways. I know for sure this has come up several times for myself, and the situation that always come to the forefront for me was when I was working for one of the agencies, and I was in charge of overhauling a entire function staffed by 70, 80 people. And the governing board that was responsible for this function, educator certification, it had just been a wreck. I mean, it's all on the record. I mean, there's no reason for me to speak around it. I'm like, we had to go through so many things. There were all these rules that had not been processed properly. So we were having to go back and review them and resubmit them, and then send them back through for approval so that they could be on the record in the administrative code for the state properly, because they were not. I stepped into this, right? I was not responsible for the mess being created. I was responsible, been appointed to come in and clean up the mess, and it was a hot mess. And I remember every time I thought that there was no, like, it can't possibly get worse, it got worse. Y'all, it was horrible. Horrible. And I remember one time we were in the midst of it. It was just bad. And we had to have a board meeting to vote on whatever that set of rules was. I don't know what number it was at that point, but to go in. And it was pretty bad. And there were already a couple of other board members who were not going to be able to make it for legitimate purposes. But I remember being on a call. I was the senior executive, you know, managing all of this. And I had to get on a call with a board member who was basically trying to flake out on the decision. But if they weren't there to take that vote the next day, it wasn't going to go through. And all of these things were time sensitive. So it wasn't like, oh, you could just put it off to the next time. No, because there was so much stuff we were having to clean up. It wasn't just time sensitive because it would put us off track for this, but like literally, these rules would not be valid, and there would be gaps in the statutes supporting the law, in the rules supporting the law, if they weren't adopted. Like, this is how deep it ran. I told you it was a mess. And I remember having some very choice words with that person and to say, look at here, we have been busting our butt to get this mess fixed. And it's not pretty and it's not pleasant, but the action has to be taken, and that's your job. I'm doing my job by helping to clean up all of this mess. Your job is to vote on it and make it right. And that person ended up coming in, but it was not without a very, very frank conversation by me with them to say, hey, this is one of those times the action has to be taken. Like there's not another option. And that will come up. When you're a leader, they're not always, people think leadership is all about, they mistake leadership for being solely about power. Leadership is not about power. It is actually so far from being about power if you're going to be a good leader. Good leadership is about trust. Good leadership is about uh, building solid relationships so that people have the confidence to believe and trust you when it does come time for a difficult decision to be made that will make most people uncomfortable. Like that. That's a whole other conversation as well. All right. Number 4. Oh, relating to one of my favorite topics about building relationships, make sure that you build your support team for what they can contribute, not for their agreement. um, it's really important to choose folks who think differently. Now, this is rich, right? Because so often people would prefer to have people around them. What's the term, the fancy word for it? Sycophants, who will just tell you whatever you want to hear, tell you what you want to know, and make it sound good and just kiss up. That is not good leadership. Good leadership, great leadership is not about having a bunch of, yes, you're wonderful all the time people around you. It is not it. And each one of these presidents, especially Lincoln, that story is fascinating. You should go check it out. Where he deliberately chose people from opposing parts of the political spectrum, where he deliberately chose people who had different economic um, uh, uh, insights on what was going on in the time, deliberately chose them and made them all a part of his cabinet. Like there are books written about this, again, by that same author. And it is so powerful because it requires mastery and self-control to be able to do that, right? To know that you're deliberately choosing people who don't agree, but you respect their what they bring to the table. And you don't want, because guess what? If everything's just the same, how do you get fresh ideas? How do you get fresh insights? How are you challenging your thoughts and what's being brought to the table if you don't bring differing viewpoints to the table through the people that you interact with? So I always think about that. And I know people might think, oh, you have all friends of one certain political side of the spectrum or something like that. Mm, no, not really. Because throughout my career, I had to work with people on opposite sides of the aisle all the time. That's how you got to reach agreement on certain legislation that otherwise might not move forward if you don't negotiate that. So if you don't come to an agreement. I also was always about making sure to pull in folks, even if I didn't really care for them. I mean, there were times I had to work with people I just didn't even like, right? But I had to take what they brought to the table, utilize it for the purposes at hand. We didn't have to be besties for that to happen. And that's true in each of our individual lives and your professional lives as well. Like, you don't You don't have to be besties in order to respect someone's thought process and the insights, the challenges that they can bring to the table to help you be a better leader, to help you make more informed decisions, right? Because sometimes the best leaders already know what the opposition or what the other side is going to say, or what the cons to their arguments. But you sometimes you can only get there by actually receiving that and listening to people who don't agree with you. All right. So that's the fourth thing. The fifth leadership nugget is you cannot be afraid to take huge, bold steps to achieve your goals. It's just got to be done. There are moments when you just have to go do the thing that people are going to call you crazy for doing, that they're going to be like, you've lost it. That's not possible. I believe that Roosevelt was one of the ones with his whole New Deal. And that's where that came. He was doing stuff. People were like, that is crazy. That is never going to work. Right. But challenging times and crises, brings pressure to do things that haven't been done before. I believe we're in that one of those spaces and one of those times currently. In order for the country to move beyond where we are now, like there's going to have to be some out of the box thinking, action taken, um, engaged in order for us to successfully move forward to the next level and to earn back the trust that people have lost in our leaders, in our government, right? So this is where history, you know, pays off to, you know, take a look. What is it? The song from Hamilton about history has his eyes on you? Yes, 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 yes. That part. And so making sure that you're willing to that you're willing to do the things that need to be done. Okay, so the next piece, the where am I? Oh, the last one. Number 6, which is do not be overcome. Um you can't be overcome with overwhelm no matter how dire the situation. So what does that mean? Because I know there was like words there. It's when the flood of whatever of stuff is coming at you, and it would be so easy to just be taken over by it. It's literally resisting that and keeping a clear mind, some clear perspective, stepping away if need be, getting some people pulled in to help lift the wave so that you can see for just a hot minute, right? Um, because when things are just coming at you left and right, it will be very easy to get overwhelmed by it. And this is when sometimes, maybe it's a good compartmentalization that needs to happen, compartmentalizing of issues and concerns, of delegating. There was a lot of that in with all of these leaders, of delegating responsibilities wherever it was possible so that things could be managed and so you could keep going. So there's a lot there. And the thought that I'm leaving with you to engage for reflection in your own life now or from the past or however you want to approach it, but engaging in some reflection time to ask, are you a bold leader? Right? If so, where? And if not, in what places? And really and truly, where can you act more boldly in your personal and professional life? I think that's a question that can be asked um, over and over again to help keep things fresh, to help keep you and I on the right path, hopefully, so that not just going down as okay leaders or good, even good leaders, but being able to go down as a great leader in your space professionally, your community, and that the legacy that's left behind is one that you're proud of ultimately, right? So, thank you for joining me today. As always, have to remind you to please, please, please press like and subscribe to get this out to others. And I will make sure to link up the things in the description that hopefully that I've talked about, and make reference to them. And as I was going to say is remember to celebrate you and all of your greatness in all of the ways in each and every day, so that um, you continue to be on a growth path that is sustainable and purposeful for you and your life and where you want to be headed along. In the journey. All right. Take care, and we will talk again tomorrow. Bye bye.